I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
Today is a little bit of an experiment. I want to talk to you about a day in the life of an entrepreneur. I think everybody has misconceptions about what entrepreneurs are. And to be fair, there's lots of different kinds of entrepreneurs. There's entrepreneurs who stay focused on one thing, like Sam Walton, the guy who started Walmart. He was obsessed with retail. Like, I would always hear these stories about how he would go into competitors' stores. He was just obsessed with every single detail of retail. So he was really passionately interested in one thing, and that's what he was the entrepreneur about. And that's why the Walton family as a group is probably the richest family in America, piggybacking off of his obsession. But a lot of entrepreneurs, I would say the average entrepreneur, is not focused and does many different things. And there are reasons for that, but I'll give you some examples. Richard Branson right now, he's got over 300 different businesses. I think there are 300 different businesses with the Virgin name on it. Everything from clothing to music to, of course, the airline, which he sold, and then I think it just went bankrupt, to all sorts of Virgin Galactic, all sorts of things. So it's everything from like clothes to spaceships. Elon Musk, of course, there's Tesla, but then there's Neuralink, which is he wants to put a chip in the brain. Then there's Hyperloop. He wants fast transportation from San Francisco to LA. And then there's Solar City, which Tesla bought, which is all about solar power. So, and Mark Cuban, of course, he's got the Dallas Mavericks. He's got, movie companies, movie theater companies. He's invested in another couple hundred companies through Shark Tank. And I think that's the nature of being an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs have more questions than answers. So they ask, well, what happens if I put a chip in the brain? And somebody then thinks, could the chip do a search on Google and then trigger the right neurons to have search results? Can I make an anti-gravity suit using magnets and blah, blah, blah? I don't know. So again, you always want to, in my very first successful company, it was a company called Reset. I always say the company made websites. But to be honest, we didn't really know what was the best thing for us to do. I was scared of just being in one business. What if there was a recession and nobody hired us to make a website? So we were constantly trying to figure out other things to do. I'll give you some examples. At one point, we figured, let's try starting a record label. And we actually heard a song from some, startup rap group in New Hampshire. And we called them and tried to convince them to sign up for our record label. And they quite correctly said, no way, we'll see you later. And I'd like to be able to say, and then they became the Wu-Tang Clan, but that's not what happened. I never heard of that group again. So maybe they should have signed with us. Then there was another time we experimented with setting up a tea company. So all of us, including me, went home and bought ingredients to make different teas, like fruit teas or healthy teas or whatever. And we all brought them in the tea that we made into the office, and we tried to make a good none of the teas tasted good. Like, our employees almost vomited several times trying this tea. But this was a valid business idea we were trying to do. So my company was called Reset. And again, the way we did make money was building websites for, record labels, movie studios, American Express, and so on. But for the heck of it, we tried to make a tea company. And you could have said, well, that's very unfocused. Why'd you do that? And yeah, we were unfocused. But who knows? Who knows what could have worked out? Another time we were thinking of making a website that kept track of agents and all the clients those agents had. So if you wanted to, I don't know, if you were a movie studio and you wanted to contact an actor, or you were a reporter and you wanted to contact an actor, here's the database of agents and actors, and you would have to pay a subscription fee. So that was another thing. Another time we pitched TV show ideas to MTV. Like, we were constantly, almost every day, trying to come up with new ideas for businesses. We were thinking of being an ad agency. We were thinking of being a software company. And so in the end, of course, we were a services business. That probably wasn't the best choice, to be honest, for a lot of reasons that I've described in other podcasts. But we probably should have been a software product business. But I just didn't know what I was doing then. I had the software skills, and even I developed products to help me make websites, but I didn't really understand what it meant to be a product business. I didn't understand, you raise money from venture capitalists, and this is what a deal looks like. So I figured, you know what? I'm going to be profitable and be a service business. So that's what we were. And even then, we weren't that focused. Sometimes we did, record labels. Sometimes we did utility companies like Con Edison. Sometimes we did software. Sometimes we did design. Sometimes we did logos. Sometimes blah, blah, blah. We did all sorts of things. So, and then later in the OOs, I started a hedge fund, but I also started a website business called Stock Picker. I helped out a mental rehab facility and made some money on that. I did all sorts. I was a writer. I was trying to work for various hedge funds. I always got nervous if I was too dependent on any one idea. That doesn't mean start 5 businesses, although it can. It might mean with your one business, make sure you diversify so that if there's a downturn in the economy or a downturn in your industry, you still have sources of income. Or, make sure that your source of income is somewhat economy independent. Like, I'm invested in one company. It's called Outstanding Foods. They make sort of like vegan chips, and it is so good. It's like bacon flavored vegan chips, and it tastes like bacon. And I've been invested in it for years. In the past year or so, they released their first product. It's so good. I constantly order it. The great thing about this company, what I like the best, is you could find their chips not in the vegan section of the store, but in the actual snack section. Like, I hate buying snacks in the vegan section. So I really like that they ended up in the vegan section. So anyway, they're very focused. The chef loves cooking good tasting vegan food. He was the chef for Beyond Meats before this. And the CEO has been a vegan since he was like 9 years old. So I know they're dedicated. This is their life stream is to do this. Me, I am interested in many things. I can't help it. And if I do just one thing in a day, sometimes I feel a little anxious. So I say all this to describe a day in the life. And to be honest, I make a lot of mistakes. as you know, I kind of document my stakes brutally. But I think even right now, a couple things have been happening. First, I think I've bitten off more than I can chew. I think I've taken on too many projects and activities, and I'm trying to figure out which one makes me nervous. And I'll tell you how I decide these things when I describe this day. The other thing is, of course, we've gone through this lockdown, and this has changed my daily activity quite a bit. I have no real meetings outside the house anymore. Haven't since March. I don't do some of the things that I was doing on a regular basis. Like I don't go out to comedy clubs and perform or visit or whatever. Pretty much, I don't go to any networking dinners or any dinners at all, really. I just kind of stay here and work all day and spend time with my family and then go back to work and go back and forth. But then when I say work, I want to make sure I'm somewhat enjoying everything. Enjoyment is not a criteria. Like I know Warren Buffett says he never goes to work because he dances to work every day, like or something like that. You know, sometimes work is difficult, but it should never be something you hate doing. And if your work is something you hate doing, that's a good sign. Like if it gives you unbearable anxiety, that's a good sign that you don't have to quit it tomorrow, but every day move 1% further from that idea or project. Like I remember in 2015, something like that, my goal, I started the year January 1st. I said, I'm going to write a novel this year. And things change. February of that year, I did stand-up comedy for the first time. It was over 5 years ago. And I got obsessed. And that became my extra project. I no longer had time to write a novel. And you'll see it's on my list right now today, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, and by the way, I'm sharing this again to show you not that I'm so great or productive or entrepreneurial. In fact, a lot of things you might say, oh, that's a waste of time. I would never do that. But just everybody's different. And this is the kind of things I do. People ask me all the time, how are you productive in the specific way you're productive? And, you know, I'm hoping this will shed some light on that, and I'll kind of share some projects I'm working on that I'm excited about. One thing that's happened in this lockdown is that for the first time in many, many years, I'm super excited about entrepreneurship. And that doesn't mean, I'm all motivated, or here's how to be more motivated, or here's what the brain of an entrepreneur is like. It's just that I'm really interested in business models that could work in today's environment. It's really become kind of almost an obsession for me lately. Here's what I do. I wake up as early as possible. It used to be much earlier, but now I would say I wake up around 6:30 or 7 a.m. when I don't stay up too late. Sometimes I stay up late watching TV. I love TV. And then, you know, after morning stuff, the first kind of work-related activity I do is I read. I always make sure I start off reading. If you wake up early enough, there's no other distractions. Like I don't check my email. I haven't yet checked my email. I haven't checked social media. I haven't checked the news. I haven't checked anything at all. My mind is clear. I'm excited for the day. I want to learn something. I'll sometimes, have my notebook with me so I can either take notes or start writing down ideas. This morning, I read, this guy recommended to me this political philosopher, John Rawls, Rawls. So I bought a book called Political Liberalism, but it's not liberalism in the traditional sense. What this guy is trying to do is figure out a political system that works. So if you have any one philosophy, it's sort of a political philosophy or a religious philosophy. And if you want to lead your country or the world with that political philosophy, it's sort of a guarantee that many people will not be happy. Like if I say, oh, we're going to have a country that's ruled by just extreme libertarianism, some people will be happy, some people won't. If I say we're going to run a country the way Protestants would suggest running the country, some people will be happy, some people won't. And so political liberalism is about how you listen to a wide variety of people from all different philosophies and work on coming up with a consensus about how to rule. Some people could be socialists, some people could be capitalists, some people could be religious conservatives, some people could be libertarians. Everybody has their own issues that are important to them. Some people it's, pro-life versus pro-choice. Other people it's gun control. Other people it's no taxes. Other people it's tariffs or immigration. So this guy, John Rawls, in this book, Political Liberalism, basically tries to determine a set of rules for what are reasonable philosophies. So, for instance, if your philosophy is to murder everybody, that's not a reasonable philosophy. So what are a reasonable set of rights that are broad enough that it fits many, many different philosophies under it? And then how do you determine what is the best way to come to a consensus? And it doesn't necessarily mean democracy. It doesn't necessarily mean consensus. He explores all sorts of different ways. And it's just interesting, given politically how polarized the world is now. I kind of wanted to get a deeper philosophical understanding of what political philosophy is, as opposed to just, hey, I like this candidate, or I like this candidate, or I feel like this guy's a nice guy, or I feel like this guy's a jerk. So I wanted to go a little bit beyond what the newspapers are giving us and really understand how to think a little deeper politically, something I've never done before. Previously with politics, I'm always really interested in the game theory aspect of it. Like, what's Joe Biden's strategy for winning? What's Donald Trump's strategy for winning? And this time, I just wanted to explore a little deeper. Then I read fiction. I always read quality fiction because that's how I become a better writer, is by studying the greats. Well, you could say, well, if you read nonfiction, can you be a better writer that way? No, nonfiction writers, not all of them. Just want to repeat that. Brian Keating, if you're listening, you're a good writer. I love losing the Nobel. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about John Rawls. This guy, this political philosopher, is the most boring writer on the planet. I mean, here's an example sentence. I'll just read a random one. A basic feature of a well-ordered political society is that there is a public understanding not only about the kinds of claims it is appropriate for citizens to make when questions of political justice arise, but also a public understanding, blah, blah, blah. See, it's boring. So this guy, John Rawls, he has spent his whole life studying political philosophy, not writing. So fiction writers have spent their whole lives studying writing and storytelling. And so I love to read a good writer. So I'm reading this collection of short stories by Amy Hempel, The Collected Stories. And I've read this. I first read Amy Hempel stories in 1994 when an English professor recommended this book to me. But then Chuck Palahniuk, I don't know how to say his last name, when he was on my podcast, he's the author of Fight Club. When he and I were talking, he recommended it again. So I picked up the book and I've been reading it again. And so here's the first sentence in a short story. This is why I like her. Here's the first sentence in a short story called The Center. For the price of a cup of coffee a day, my friend Deborah adopted a child. I just opened to this story randomly, and I love that first sentence. I'll read it again. For the price of a cup of coffee a day, my friend Deborah adopted a child. So the first part of that sentence says, for the price of a cup of coffee a day. She doesn't say for 35 cents a day. If she just said for $1 a day, if she had just said that, it would be a little less interesting, a little less provocative. This is more visual. It's sensual. You smell it, you taste it, you can see it, as opposed to just like, measuring something, $1. And then she says, my friend Deborah adopted a child. Well, did she adopt a child? No, you realize at the end of that sentence, it's like one of those, for $1 a day, a child in Africa could get fed or go to school or whatever. So in that one sentence, you start to get layers of a story. And that's why a great writer is a great writer. So anyway, why do I discuss this on a day in the life of an entrepreneur? Because a key skill for entrepreneurship is being able to tell a story. And so understanding how to tell a story, understanding how to communicate, and getting better and better at it. And by the way, you never get great at it. You always just get better at it. You don't say, I'm a great writer or I'm a bad writer. You say, I am getting better at it. And that's what I like to be able to say every day. So then I wrote, and I'll talk about more about what I wrote yesterday. I wrote an article on why I think New York City is in big trouble. I posted this article on Facebook last night, and it is by far the article with the most engagement I've ever had. Probably because a lot of people are considering moving out of New York City. New York City is pretty scary right now. Nobody's at work. There's a lot more violence. There's a lot more crime. The police don't seem to be around. And this, I'm not saying this to complain about New York. I wrote this article, though, that basically explained from a variety of levels why New York City is in more trouble than people think. But it all added up to two things. One is expenses are going up in New York, obviously, because of the pandemic, and revenue is going down. That's bad for a business. It's bad for a human. It's bad for a city. So if all of your businesses are leaving the city, you're going to get less taxes, which is never good when your expenses are going up. The other thing is people say, well, okay, this has happened before. Businesses will come back. Oh, yeah? Well, what about if they don't come back? And here's the one thing that's different between now and every other crisis in New York City's history. And I say New York City specifically because it's considered the financial capital of the world. So it's important for businesses to return to New York City. So here's the thing that's different. Bandwidth. After 2008, all the businesses eventually flourished. After 9/11, all the businesses came back and flourished in New York City. What is different now? Well, in 2008, the average internet speed was about 3 megabits per second. That is not enough to do good, high quality, consistent video. You couldn't do video phone calls then. It was too difficult. People would always fade out. Now, the average internet speed is about 20 to 30 megabits per second. Good enough for high quality video. Now, everybody I speak to, and I'm saying, how are you doing not being in the office? Like my book editor, or like my friends who work in banking, or my friends who are entrepreneurs, or my friends who, are writers. They're all just, hey, we're doing Zoom meetings. We're so much more productive not having to commute. Some people like going to an office, but most people really don't like going to an office. Who likes going to an office and hanging out with a bunch of people that you're not really friends with the people in the cubicles next to you? I mean, you might be temporarily, but think about it. If you ask yourself, am I going to go to Jack's funeral when he dies? Jack's the guy in the cubicle next to me. Am I going to go to Susan's funeral? Susan was the woman in the cubicle next to me when I worked in a cubicle. And the answer is no, I am not going to go to Susan's funeral. She might even be dead right now, and I have no idea. But we were friends then when we were cubicle mates. And, if I could have worked at home, I would have, believe me. She was talking on the phone all day long. I couldn't stand it. So, enough of that rant. But the increase in bandwidth means companies don't have to go back to work. Well, what if they want to go back to work? Well, there's other issues. We have a pandemic, so are there liability issues? Again, companies might say, rather than deal with the liability issues of having everybody back in the office, better to just stay remote. And I talked about in this article that I wrote yesterday, I talked about how universities are going mostly remote, which leads to another problem of students don't have to move back to New York City, so a lot of apartments will be vacant. Well, today, the day after I wrote that article, Columbia University, which was going to have all the students back, they just announced no on-campus learning first semester. It's going to be all remote. But as compensation, we'll give 10% discount on tuition. Are you kidding me? What are you going to, it's $70,000 a year to go to Columbia. That 10%. So instead of having the full dormitory on-campus situation, a kid is going to have to stay at home all day long and go to these remote classes and not make friends and not, I thought the whole idea is that the campus experience is worth the tuition when you meet the professors and you meet and debate the other students and you network and so on. That's 80% of college, I thought. Well, I guess not. And it just underlines what I was saying about New York, and it's underlined what I've been saying for 15 years about colleges. But that's what I wrote yesterday. The reason I mentioned yesterday is because today I've been doing more responding to comments on this article. This article was so popular that I've responded to hundreds of comments, and it's not really writing, but I chalked it up to that anyway. And there's some other writing projects that I've done today as well, which I'll get to in a second. Now, I'm involved in lots of different businesses. I'm involved in a newsletter business. So I have a bunch of different newsletters. Some are free, some are subscription, where I talk about business ideas, I talk about stocks, I talk about investing. This is a very small part of my entrepreneurial life, but I brainstormed some ideas for future newsletter issues. I think to myself, well, what do I think are great investment trends that I want to start studying and looking into? And I kind of want to look at, what are going to be the interesting 6G stocks that are out there? Are there any micro cap? You heard of 4G, that's what's on your phones now. You heard of 5G, that's what's coming. But what you always want to look ahead. You always want to, what's that Wayne Gretzky quote? He's the hockey player. Skate to where the puck is going, not to where the puck is. So the puck in investing is going to 6G stocks instead of 5G. So what's on the horizon? I want to look at that. And I also took a look earlier today at the financials of the first half. We did our first half audit. I took a look at the financials. I had some questions. It was a good first half so far, but we'll see. And then I'm involved in a little business called a podcast. So this podcast, it's a team of about 4 or 5, 6 of us, a bunch of us. A lot of work goes into making this podcast. And we also try to, the podcast makes money through sponsors and advertisers. And I'm not going to say this is a great business. I don't think anyone should start a single podcast and say, oh, I'm going to make a ton of money with this. But the podcast makes enough revenues to pay for the equipment and the people working with it and so on. So I have to treat it like a legit business. I have to keep track of the inflows and the outflows of money, but I also have to reach out and find guests that interest me. So, and a lot of times people reach out to me and I'm really bad at follow-up, but I have to just remind myself. It used to be the case in prior businesses, like my first business Reset in the 90s. I would hire somebody just to follow up for me. But now I'm trying to get better at follow-up. For instance, Paris Hilton has a documentary coming out about her in September. And so her publicity team reached out to me and asked if Paris Hilton could come on the James Altucher Show. And so, of course, I wrote back, yes. And then I just followed up with them today and to try to narrow down a date. Another person I reached out to, I saw that Sam Harris has a book coming out in a few weeks. Sam Harris has been on the podcast twice before. I think he's a super smart guy. I love his books, and it's been really fun when he's come on the podcast. In fact, the last time he was on the podcast, I invited a couple people to come to the podcast. One person was snoring during the podcast, so I kind of wanted to make it up to Sam a little bit. So I promised nobody would be snoring, and I reached out to him, and he responded right away, said he would love to come on the podcast, so we booked a day, and that was great. The next thing is writing related. So there is this, how do I describe, let's say an African-American leader who I think had done a radio interview recently that I was excited to listen to, and it made me think of an idea for a book he could write. So a few weeks ago, it was my idea list of the day. I wrote an outline for this person I barely knew and pitched a book idea to him. I said, you should do this idea. It had 10 chapters. I'm not going to describe the book exactly because it's his idea, and I want him, I think it would be great for him to do it. And it's kind of based on the interview that I was listening to. And I did like a fair amount of research to do this initial outline. This was a few weeks ago. I did this outline. It took about a day. And I pitched this idea to him that he should do this. And he wrote back right away, great idea. And he's doing the book. And he had some more questions for me about my outline. And so that was essentially my idea list for the day, was kind of fleshing out this outline a bit more and how he could structure it. And I had some ideas for the audiobook. So we had been emailing back and forth. So that was kind of, once I finish my reading and my writing for the day and some business stuff, I always try to, at some point closer to noon, make my idea list of the day. And that was that. But I did 2 idea lists because then I decided I want to do a new project. And this is where I'm starting to bite off more than I could chew. But, I always like to have a bunch of projects in the air, and then we'll see which ones I'll do.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So, I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get 2 memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. A lot of people ask me, they ask these questions. When are we going to get back to normal? When are we going to get back to a new normal? And what does a new normal look like? Back in March, I said, this pandemic is going to peak on April 15th, which is true. That was the high point for both New York and the US, was around April 15th. And then I thought it would be gone about 2 or 3 months later. It's not gone. It's kind of leveling off, but it's been doing that for much longer than I thought. I do think it's basically gone in many states, including New York, but of course some states are flaring up. And back then, there was a new normal where, okay, remote is going to be important. AI, automation, and those things are still going to be important. But it's not going to be a new normal anymore. That period has long gone. Like right now, we're in what I call the Great Reset, which is that the economy is not up or down. The economy is unrecognizable. The U.S. economy has essentially tilted, and money it's like a pail of water that has tilted over, and the water is spilling everywhere with no consequences. So basically, a pail of trillions of dollars of money that Congress and the Federal Reserve have printed up and dropped on the American economy, no one really knows where that money has been going. Some of that has been going into the stock market, but a lot of it's just going into random spots in the U.S. economy. I think what's happening is there's no up or down anymore. It's going to be a total reset. Some industries that you wouldn't expect are going to start to flourish. Some are going to disappear. Some cities there's going to be an exodus. People are going to leave all the major first-tier cities like New York City. If you live in New York City, you're paying 16.7% higher, more taxes than you would pay in Miami. Like, let's say in Miami, your federal tax rate was 30%. That means in New York City, you're probably paying up to 47%. With everybody going remote, there's no reason to do that. So LA, San Francisco, Chicago, New York City, all of these cities are getting more violent. The benefits of living there are going away. The taxes are high. And by the way, I'm happy to be wrong on this. So I don't care if I'm right or wrong. I'm trying to, just like all of us, I'm trying to figure it out. But the benefits of having my podcast is that I'm able to talk to a lot of people from a lot of different areas of life and really ask these questions and hopefully filter them and curate them so that I can make a good guess. Nobody could predict, but I'm trying to make as good a guess as possible and express my reasons why. Now, of course, some people will say, oh, this guy's just a dumb idiot. But what I decided, though, was this idea of a great reset is kind of an interesting book idea. While everybody's still trying to figure out this election, while everybody's still trying to figure out the new normal, there's a lot of things, a lot of issues in this great reset period. I'm convinced that we're going to look back and call this period between 2020 and 2030 the Great Reset. Just like there was the Great Depression, of course, was from 1929 to 1940. Then we had the Great Inflation in the 70s, when we had stagflation. It was a bad economy, but combined with inflation, and it lasted for a decade. Then we had the Great Recession in 2008. Maybe you can call it the Great Bubble in 1999 to 2001. And now we're going to go through the Great Reset. So I spent some time outlining this book. And now, why would I do that? I already have just told you. So I have a book I'm not really working on it anymore. I submitted it. It's coming out in February. It's called Skip the Line. You could pre-order it on Amazon you want. And it's about how in this period, a lot of people are going to switch passions, switch careers. And in order to make money with a new passion, there's all these things like the 10,000 hour rule. It's just all this BS about how you have to spend 10,000 hours to get good at something. And I've been struggling with this 10,000 hour rule for so long. And I realized, you know what? Whenever I get good at something, it's not about how many hours I spend. It's about how many experiments I try for myself. It's about how many questions I ask and then test out and then go back to the drawing board. Oh, I learned this from testing that out, doing this experiment. Here's another question. Here's another question. Here's another experiment. And that's how I can quickly skip the line. And there's all sorts of other stuff I talk about in this book, but that's part of the idea. So anyway, that book's coming out in February. There's only kind of grammar corrections in that now. But as an entrepreneur, why is this important as an entrepreneur for me to be a writer? It's because I love writing. I don't really make that much money at writing. I did get a decent advance for the Skip the Line. So I outlined this new book idea, The Great Reset. And part of the reason is I love writing. I don't know if I'm going to do this book. I just outlined it. I don't know if I'll do it. I don't know if I'll self-publish it. I don't know if I'll publish it with a regular publisher. But part of the reason I think about these things is that I feel part of my overall business plan. And this is an important thing, what I'm about to say. There's a difference between finite games and infinite games. So chess is a finite game. You play it, and within an hour or so, one person checkmates the other person, the game's over, and you play again. But if I was to say my game is to be the best chess player I can be, that's an infinite game. So now I might try to improve my score. The way I measure my success at that game is how I rank versus all of my peers. So I try to keep getting better and better at chess, and I keep playing my usual opponents and try to get better and better against them. And sometimes I'll play new opponents, sometimes I'll get a mentor or a teacher. And the idea is with entrepreneurship, too many people go into entrepreneurship thinking it's a finite game. Like, oh, I'm going to make this one idea, I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to be rich, and then I'm going to retire to Hawaii. And you know what? That's fine for some people. I did a podcast a few weeks ago with Bill Perkins, author of Die with Zero. He was trader for a few years, and now he's retired. While I was doing the podcast with him, he was on a yacht in Croatia. He's just enjoying life now, and good for him. He worked hard. He did it. He played a finite game with money, and now he's trying to play an infinite game with his contentment in life, and I appreciate that. For me, writing is mixed with entrepreneurship, is mixed with my pleasure in life, and it's an infinite game. When I write, I want to say something incredibly original and unique, not because I'm trying to be contrarian, but I want to say what I mean, and I'm only going to write about things that are important to me, but there's no use writing something that's already been written. I want to be known as a good writer, an original thinker, and then that attracts more people to read my stuff, listen to my podcast, and participate in, as a customer, maybe in businesses that I start or other things that I do. Let's say if I do a TV show or a video or whatever. So anyway, I call this book The Great Reset, and I outline it. I'll just read you some of the chapters. This is not your grandpa's new normal. And I say we're never going back to anything remotely resembling normal. And then the next chapter is History of the Greats, the Great Depression, the Great Inflation, the Great Recession, the Great Reset. And then I have the next chapter is Marxism versus socialism versus capitalism. And what are we? And then the next chapter after that in this outline is opportunities, 10 specific opportunities that people will have in the Great Reset. And then I go on and on and on. And I talk about what's Obamism versus Trumpism versus AOCism versus Yangism. And then I talk about the 2 skills you need to have in the Great Reset. I talk about, is it going to be a dystopia or a utopia? I'll talk about the technology you have to know. Talk about worst case scenario versus best case scenario. And then I conclude with, and now what should the reader do? I have some more chapters. I didn't read all of them, but that's the basic idea. I sent it off to my agent, and we'll see if she responds. She might never respond. She might hate the idea. We will see. So that was the Great Reset book. Already, I'm starting to bite off more than I could chew. I'm getting a little tense. I'm not able to follow up with everybody I want to follow up with. So now, the next thing I did is I am starting a new company. So again, as everybody listening to this knows, obviously I have a podcast. I've done 620 of these podcasts. I also had another podcast a few years ago called Ask Altucher, where I did about, 100 episodes, 150 episodes. I had another podcast that I did with Stephen Dubner, who co-wrote Freakonomics. It was called Question of the Day. I did about 100 episodes of that. And I've probably been on about 500 or 600 people's podcasts as a guest. So that's like 1,500 podcasts roughly. So I know a lot about podcasting. It's like the one area where I feel I don't know everything, but there are some things I know very well. Like, for instance, I know what software I need and what I need in that software to do a podcast. Like, a lot of podcasters use Zoom. Some podcasters use Squadcast. Some podcasters use CleanFeed. None of this software is good enough. And so I'm creating podcast software that solves some very basic problems that all podcasters have. And there's no podcasting platform that solves it. The alpha version of my software is done. And so I'll describe it in a second, but I'll describe it right now. So Zoom, when you use Zoom, one person does the recording, and that person who's doing the recording is recording the video and the audio. And sometimes because you might have a bad internet connection, but if you're not recording and he's recording, or she, he'll get bad audio from you. And if your internet connection is bad, he'll get bad video from you. Squadcast, the software that I usually use, they came up with this ingenious idea, and I think others have used the idea as well, like Zencaster. But they came up with this idea, let's record the audio on both sides, and while the 2 guests are talking, it uploads to whoever's recording it. And so you get perfect audio because I'm recording on my side, you're recording on your side, we're both uploading to the audio engineer, and boom, great audio. But Squadcast doesn't have video. So I'm making software, it's called Xcaster, that's going to have audio, video. We're going to have virtual reality. We're going to have better chat. We're making so many improvements to the basic podcasting software. It's going to be like much more powerful than anything out there. And so earlier today, I was able to test the first pre-release version. It's not the first, actually. It's like about the second or third, but it's the version where I'm starting to see all the functionality. And it was looking great, almost too good. I was a little suspicious how good it looked because the video looked really excellent. But we'll see. There's still more things we're going to do. And hopefully in the next couple days, I'll be able to release a real beta version to people. I'm super excited about this. And by the way, I'm not excited about this. Again, this is finite games versus infinite games. Finite game, I would think to myself, gosh, I hope I could release this and then sell it as quickly as possible. But my motivation here was I really just wanted to make software that I would use. Like, I need my podcast to be the highest possible quality. And there was no software out there that could help me. So this software, Xcaster, I hope is that software. And we'll see. We're so far, so good. So we'll see. Then had to deal with some family stuff. Midday, family always comes first. Got a random request from a reader. Someone said they had started my book, then they got busy, they got pregnant, they had a baby, and they had lent out my book, Choose Yourself, and the person never returned it. And she just wanted me to know that she was buying my book again. because now she's at home watching her baby and she wants to read it and she doesn't have it. So I said, don't buy it. And with the help of Jay, who helps produce this podcast, he's listening right now. He's audio engineering this episode. With the help of Jay, we sent her 3 different books of mine, and I hope she enjoys them when she gets them. Then I brainstormed for another newsletter idea for my newsletter business. It's called Death of the Salaried Employee, and how right now we're seeing the end of corporatism, the end of salaries. Nassim Taleb, who wrote Fooled by Randomness, The Black Swan, all these great books, he has famously said the 3 most addictive things in life are heroin, carbohydrates, and a stable salary. And he was right. 1 out of 3 people just got laid off from their salary at the beginning of this pandemic. So very prophetic of you, Nassim. And I really do think corporatism, which is not the same as capitalism, it's this belief that capitalism could be fulfilled if we're all loyal to corporations, which I don't believe. I think corporatism is dead. And what does that mean for us? So I was brainstorming what are all sorts of newsletter issues that could revolve around a newsletter like this? And what does it mean for politics? What does it mean for entrepreneurs? What does it mean for the media? And on and on and on. I don't know if that'll be a newsletter or not, but we'll see. Then I had to read ads. So this is, I don't always enjoy this. I want to make this more fun. I had to read ads for this. You're going to hear ads during this podcast. I go over every ad and I approve every sponsor. Again, it's the only way that this podcast makes money. So I read a bunch of ads, including ads for a brand new sponsor, Amazon Alexa Smart Home, which I'm very excited about. In fact, I can't wait to get the smart home. I have Alexa, which I talk to all day long, even in my sleep. Then did an experiment with the podcast. So I did a podcast with Brian Keating, who you've already heard on this podcast. He's a physicist. He wrote a book called Losing the Nobel, and he's a great physicist, should have won the Nobel Prize. And I pitched him this idea a few weeks ago. Let's do a podcast about 10 different ways the universe might have began. So like the Big Bang, or, maybe we're in the multiverse, maybe we're in a VR simulation, on and on. And he said, this is a great idea. Maybe we could even make a book out of it. So we did the first episode of that earlier today. I don't know when it'll be released, but in 2 hours, we only got to 2 or 3, and it was fascinating. I loved it, and I love doing the research for this. So more to come on that one. Then I had a call with, so I'm always I don't know everything about social media. For years, I loved Twitter and Facebook and Quora, and that's it. But I also have a presence on LinkedIn. I have a presence on Instagram, TikTok. I haven't done any dancing on TikTok, but maybe I will one day. Been taking beatboxing classes, actually. Who knows? But I have a bunch of different social media, and I just don't know what to do. And I want to get my social media a little bit more active, because when I have a book coming out, and I want to be able to share this podcast on social media a little bit more. Just being honest. So I called up VaynerMedia. I've temporarily hired Gary Vaynerchuk's company, VaynerMedia, to audit all my use of social media and help me come up with some suggestions and best practices for improving my social media. So I had a call with them. It's very interesting. And they were just asking questions. They're in the fact-finding phase. And then at this point in the day, it's like the afternoon. I'm done with my reading, my writing, coming up with ideas, podcasting. So now what I do is like what I call basic business. So I'm involved as either in an early investor or an entrepreneur in lots of different ideas. And so I see what I can do to help the businesses that I'm an investor in or an owner of or involved in or whatever. So I'm an investor in this law enforcement company, Wrap Technologies, which, if you haven't heard me talk about it before, it's a device it's like mobile handcuffs. It's like a non-lethal, non-harmful weapon. It fires a steel cable out of the device, which wraps around you and very tightly. And if you struggle to get out, it gets tighter. I've been wrapped many times. It doesn't hurt at all, but it does immobilize you. And it's pretty cool. And so about 2 months ago, I saw Andrew Yang was tweeting about it. So earlier today, I introduced this. I was a seed investor back in 2017. It's now a public company. And earlier today, I introduced this CEO of a company to Andrew Yang, who had been on my podcast. And I said to Andrew, I always do permission networking. So I asked both sides first, can I make the introduction? So I introduced Andrew to the CEO via email. We'll see what happens. Probably nothing, but it never, both sides said okay. And that's what I do. Then, and I'm not very good at being a networker, but when I do it, I try to be effective. Then I had a call with the comedy club, Stand Up New York, that I'm a part owner of, and we created a comedy course. And I wanted to see if I could to advertise this comedy course on the podcast. It's a great course. So had a little call on that. I confirmed a podcast with John Mackey, who's the founder of Whole Foods. Very excited about that. And then I had dinner. And dinner is not usually business for me, but this time I had dinner with a great guy who's a sponsor for the podcast and an upcoming guest. I'll describe that at another time. And he has a very, very strong opinions about how people should pay down their debt, and they're different than my opinions. I sort of feel like people should not always pay down debt, and sometimes you can easily get away with not paying down debt. But I appreciated where he was coming from, and we had dinner, and it was good meeting someone and meeting a new friend. We had only met once before, and I liked that. After dinner, I told Robin an idea I had. I said, I was thinking about this when I was writing my outline for the Great Reset, which is that this period in our lives, there is a potential worst case scenario where it could turn into a very 1984-like situation. How about I write a novel called 2084? And she said, you better not tell anybody that because they might steal the idea. And I said, believe me, someone's probably already thought of this idea. But she said, you should work on that right away and just release that book as fast as you can. And I said, okay, I'll do it. But who knows? I'm starting to bite off more than I can chew. Because one thing I didn't get to today is I'm also buying some mobile apps that I think are pretty cool and that are very profitable. And I didn't have any time to work on that. I have to figure out how to manage a mobile app and how to do ads on a mobile app. I don't know. And then I have to figure out how to transfer a mobile app from these guys I'm buying it from. And then some people even want to invest in my idea of buying a bunch of mobile apps and combining them together. Sorry if I'm just like rambling about my day, but this is what I do. And I think that idea, I don't have time to do. Like that's a full business. It requires a full-time person. I do not think I have the time to do that, even though I'm super excited about the idea. Then finally, I spoke to a guy who's been my investing partner since 1999. His name's Dan. And one of the companies we've been invested in since 2010, 10 years, finally, there's an exit, and we got a choice. We could either stay as an investor or we could get out. And my rule, even though I love the company, my rule is always get out when you're given the chance, because you never know. And so it's it wasn't a huge investment, but it is a good 9 times return on our investment. So it's a 900% return in basically 10 years, which is okay. I'm not complaining. It's okay. It's not bad. It's not great. I always expect a much greater return. I like to have, for private investments that go for 10 years, I like to have something like a 5,000 or 6,000% investment or higher. But this is a 900% return, and I'll take it. And then finally, right before Jay and I started this episode, because I said, Jay, it's the end of the day. Let's talk about a day in the life of an entrepreneur. Jay said, but first, can you write a description for tomorrow's episode? I did it. I said, Jay, you're such a taskmaster, slave driver. Why you always get me do this BS stuff? But I did it, and I liked the description. And then I said, Jay, I have this idea. I want to do a day in the life. I'm going to outline it for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to call you back. We're going to do this podcast over our new software, and then we're going to release it to the audience. So I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you like stuff like this. I won't do a day in the life, but I'll do other types of one-off ideas that I hope provide some insight and some value, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know either through Twitter, or you could text me at 203-590-8607 if you want to suggest other topics. Or what's really helps me more than anything else is if you put a review for the podcast on Apple Podcasts, because that drives me up in the algorithm and makes all my dreams come true in this what I hope is the infinite game of podcasting for me. I love doing this. I really love hearing from people, and I really like to know I'm doing an okay job for everybody. So thanks once again. This was a day in the life of an entrepreneur or someone trying to be, again, an entrepreneur. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.
Wrap up your holiday shopping with savings at NFM. Hurry in now for savings in every department. Shop savings on toys, TVs, recliners, appliances, and more. Plus, shop the way you want to with savings online 24/7. Take advantage of budget-friendly 24-month financing store-wide and 30-month financing on qualifying appliance, TV, and audio purchases. Make your holidays happen for less, only at NFM. And visit NFM for your chance to win a Tesla Model Y. Minimum monthly payments required, 18% APR. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.